We started? Okay, welcome everybody. Let's begin. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We pray for special blessings from Isaac Thomas Hecker, the founder of the Paulist Fathers, who was a mystic himself, and because of his intercession, we have the he named some of them, and we've named others since, but we have those who are known as the patrons of the Paulist Fathers. So we ask you, through the intercession of Isaac Hecker, Lord, to be with us this evening. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. And the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. So there are several patrons of the Paulist Fathers, and some go back to the beginning, and some we've added more recently. So this is a series that's being run by the CIC on holy men and women.
There's no way to sneak in.
That's just fine.
I'm sorry.
Okay. So let's just do a little introduction as we start. And you want to start over here with Carl? Just say how long you've been coming to the CIC. Your name, how long you've been coming to the CIC, and where your parish is now.
My name is Carl, and I'm married to this beautiful lady, Elise, and I've been coming here for Father Lolly's classes, spirituality generally. He's had some wonderful classes, and I'm not a member of the parish.
That's okay.
Good, welcome, Carl.
Thank you.
I'm Elise. I've been coming to the Information Center since 1990 when Carl retired from the military, and the Information Center was the only place in town that had Catholic Bible study. And that's where I got my introduction to the Paulists and have been a thorn in their side ever since.
And we are so happy to have you.
I'm Marge. I've been coming to the Catholic Information Center since 1970s for their classes and everything.
Great. Nice to have you, Marge. Go ahead, Darlene.
Hi, I'm late, Darling. No, I'm sorry. I'm Darlene Truskowski, and I went to the Catholic Information Center on Ionia back in the late 70s, 80s, and then circumstances in my life. I don't want to say I'm a roaming Catholic, R-O-A-M-I-N-G, but circumstances, and but I came back. How things happen. I came back about 8 years ago, or maybe a little less, because my mind was working for a change, that I was babysitting my niece's children, and I'm not a morning person. And 7 a.m. I would have, not to miss Mass, but I remembered that the Paulists had the evening services, so I come kind of full circle. And now I'm able to, I don't think I did years ago with my work schedule, but now I'm fortunate that I can take advantage of these classes and different things that they offer.
Great. Good to see you, Darlene.
Thank you.
My name is Barb. I've been coming to the Information Center off and on since it was down on that end of town. And my reason for starting at the Information Center was because the Saturday Mass was so interesting and so laid back. And everybody seemed to know everybody. So I thought, well, I sort of like that. And then I've always been a member of St. Andrew's since the 60s. But anyway, I've been around a long time, and I like to come to the classes, so I enjoy them.
Good to see you, Barb.
And my name is Tim, and my home parish is St. Thomas the Apostle over by Aquinas College. And I used to attend some of the weekend services at the Catholic Information Center on Ionia as well many years ago, and have only been coming to the programs here for the last couple of years. So very interested in the wide variety of wonderful subjects.
Great. So welcome to all of you.
And who are you?
Oh.
I'm sorry.
I thought I'd get away with that
I think we all know who you are.
My name is, and we're being filmed tonight, so be at your best. My name is Father Bill Edens. I'm a Paulist father, and I met the Paulists when I was at UCLA as a graduate student way back in the 70s, and was very impressed with the men that I met, and so I joined the Paulists. Been ordained since 1981, and have been here at the cathedral since last year, so about a year and 2 months or 3 months. And I was just recently at a Paulist gathering in Washington, D.C. It was our East Coast regional meeting. And I thought, well, I'll take the opportunity to ask some of the guys, why do they think we have John of the Cross as one of our patrons? And of course, basically, he's one of the patrons that goes back to the very beginning, he and Teresa of Avila, because Isaac Hecker was a mystic, an American mystic. And he was very interested in reading Catherine of Genoa in particular. That was one of his favorites. And John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila and some of the other mystics. And Isaac himself had mystical tendencies. Here's from the very beginning of his autobiography. He says, "Once in my childhood, I was given over for death, having been taken down with smallpox. My mother came to my bedside and told me that I was going to die. I answered her, 'No, mother, I shall not die now. God has a work for me to do in the world, and I shall live to do it.'" So even as a young man, he had a very strong sense of call and a purpose. And this was before he was Catholic. In fact, he wasn't any particular religion. His mother was Methodist. And he eventually attended services with her and learned a lot about the Holy Spirit and about community and about service through the Methodist Church. But he had a very strong sense of inner call. And sometimes it became overwhelming for him. He just wouldn't be able to get out of his room. He was so reading and thinking, and it sapped the strength from his body. His brothers started a baking business called the Hecker Flour Company, and they wanted him to come out and work with them. And as a young man, he did some, but he wasn't able to much because his sense of God's presence just overcame him. He said, often in my boyhood, when lying at night on the shavings before the oven in the bakehouse, I would start up, roused in spite of myself by some great thought, and run out upon the wharves to look at the East River in the moonlight, or wander about under the spell of some restless aspiration. What does God desire from me? How shall I attain unto him? What is it he has sent me in the world to do? These were the ceaseless questions of my heart that rested, meanwhile, in an unshakable confidence that time itself would bring the answer. And as he grew, there have been many courses, and there will be more about Isaac Hecker, so I won't say too much. But just to say that once when he was a young man, he had a very powerful experience of an angelic being that was sitting next to him on the bed. And he said we were both quite naked, and yet there was no sense of shame. And we both felt as if this was the place we were meant to be from all of time. And then eventually the spell was broken. But this was to him a great sense that the Holy Spirit was with him in that room and had selected him to do some grand work in this world.
What you just read, I'm sorry, that was Isaac Hecker or
Isaac
St. John
Hecker.
of the Cross?
No, see, we're still on Isaac Hecker because we're talking about why did Isaac Hecker choose John of the Cross as
okay.
one of his patrons of the Paulist Fathers.
Thank you.
So Isaac Hecker was a mystic from the very beginning, and he was very drawn to mystical writings. And mystic sounds a little strange, but it just means an intense sense of God's presence, and a sense that the Holy Spirit is with him, and that was to last with him throughout his lifetime. So anyway, someday we'll talk about Isaac Hecker, but today I just wanted to talk about his mystical leanings, which led him to choose from among the patrons of the Paulist Fathers, John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila. Okay, so let's say a little bit about them. One of the great things about John of the Cross is his poetry, and that's what draws me to him. So before we get into any of his history, his background, whatever, I want to use just a little bit of his. Now, he wrote in Spanish, and he's one of the great Spanish poets. So this is translated. Darlene, would you read it for us?
Oh, sure. The living flame of love. O living flame of love, that tenderly wounds my soul in its deepest center. Since now you are not oppressive, now consummate. If it be your will, tear through the veil of this sweet encounter.
Okay, thanks, Darlene.
You're welcome.
Really interesting because it's love poetry. He speaks in terms of flames, which consume, which enlighten and consume. But he talks about wounding his soul. but it's not oppressive. This is God's presence in some way. It's consummate, consummated. So his poetry is always about spiritual marriage, the consummation of marriage, in which the soul is the feminine and in which the Lord is the masculine. If it be your will, tear through the veil of this sweet encounter. Tear through the veil. Take the veil away from my eyes so that I can see who you really are, God. I really want to know you. His poetry then he expands his poetry in several prose works that explain the type of spirituality. It was lived in the 15th century in Spain. Think Inquisition. Spain was a very intense emotional place, and the spirituality of that time could be summed up as purgative, illuminative, and unitive. These were the ways they talked about the spiritual path. The purgative went, when we think of purgatory, it strips away everything. It would strip away our appetites, our desires, the things we're attached to. The purgative was to take away all the human desires so that we could be close to God and filled with God's desires. The illuminative then was the learning that they went through, the theology, and the unitive was being united with God. So this is just a little capture of that, being consummated with God in a spiritual marriage that would open up his eyes to a sweet encounter with God. Above all, they wanted to have that encounter with the living God. And so he was loved. He was really drawn by the Song of Songs. In fact, on his deathbed, he said, they were reading to him the divine chapter, and he says, no, read to me the Song of Songs. It was his last words he heard. And here are the songs. Do you know the Song of Songs? Does everybody know that? Do you know what it is? It's a book of the Bible. It's erotic love poetry. It's named the Song of Solomon in some Bibles. So these are, understandably then, Solomon's words of love towards his lovers. Had more than one. And so, arise, make haste, my love, my dove, my beautiful one, and come. For now the winter has passed. The rains have gone far off. The flowers have appeared in our land. The time for pruning has come. The voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land. It's a short quote from the Song of Songs. This is what drew him, was the spiritual marriage, the love between lovers, male and female, the soul being the female part, and the Lord being the masculine part. But you can't overlook the erotic part, the human erotic dimension of this poetry. Arise, make haste, my love, and come, my dove. In the clefts of the rock, in the hollow of the wall, show me your face. Let your voice sound in my ears. Chapter 2 of the Song of Songs. And I just recommend it. It's not a long book, but it's really beautiful love poetry. Song of Songs. And open it up to your Bible and you'll go, how did these words ever find their way into the Bible? It's just amazing. It's just amazing, the erotic power of the word. And it's all done in Hebrew imagery, which is not quite the same as you would find in American culture. But nevertheless, it carries that power of the tender love between a man and a woman. And this is what the kind of poetry that John of the Cross loved. Okay, personal background. He was born in 1542, Fontivero, Spain. Juan de Yepes. He was born in that area between Madrid and Salamanca. And by the way, these are some slides here that Kelly herself made when Joachim Lally was making this presentation. So I asked Joachim, can I use some of your slides? And he goes, why not? You know, it's free information. So many thanks to Kelly for the nice layout of these slides. This is a weaver, and John the Cross's father, John Yepes' father, was a weaver. Very poor, by the way. He was born of privilege and renounced it for love for this woman who was from lowly estate, and his family wrote him off. So he was deathly poor, and his wife were weavers. Francisco and Luis, two older brothers. His father died when Juan was around 2. About the same time as his father Gonzalo, whose wealthy family disinherited him when he married Juan's mother, Catalina. He lived in great poverty, which more likely caused the early death of his brother Luis and Juan's father. John died on December 14, 1591 in Ubeda, Spain. So we have 1542 to 1591. He lived a hard life, and he died at the age of 49.
This is John, is that supposed to be Juan?
Well, Juan is the Spanish name,
Okay.
and we call him John.
Oh,
So
I,
it's the same person. Juan de Yepes became John of the Cross,
okay.
and he died at the age of 49. Yeah. Father was Gonzalo, and he was disinherited. They became a very poor family, and he got his education by being taken into the seminary. So he was very bright, and he could have done anything. He could have done weaving. He was talented with his hands. He could have been some kind of physical artisan, but he was drawn by the seminary. So he first took the name Fry, or Brother, John of St. Matthias in 1563. So this would be the age of 21. And here's the book of quotation from the book of the first month, a medieval Carmelite work on the spirit of the order that gives a description of what John experienced as a Carmelite. Okay, so he joined the Carmelites, which was an order based on Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Came down through the ages from the ancient rule. The goal of the life is twofold. One part we acquire with the help of divine grace through our efforts and virtuous works. So one part of it is what we do. This is to offer God a pure heart, free from all stain of actual sin. We do this when we are perfect, and that's emphasis is Joachim's, and in Cherith, that is hidden in the charity of what the wise man says, charity covers all sins. So one part of it is to be the effort that we make in charity, and charity covers all. The other part of the goal of this life is granted to us the free gift of God, recognizing that God gives the gift, namely to taste somewhat in the heart and to experience in the soul, not only after death, but even in this life, the intensity of the divine presence and the sweetness of the glory of heaven. That is, to drink of the torrent of the love of God. Two parts to the life of a Carmelite. And we can stop or we can go back if you need to, if you'd like to. So here's another stanza from his Living Flame of Love. Now this wasn't done, this was kind of his mature work, done in the 1580s. But it gives a sense of what he was moving towards as a young man. How gently and lovingly you waken my heart, where in secret you dwell alone, and in our sweet breathing, filled with good and glory, how tenderly you swell my heart with love. Doesn't that just touch you? It's beautiful love poetry. How gently and lovingly you waken my heart, where in secret you dwell alone, and in our sweet breathing, filled with good and glory, how tenderly you swell my heart with love. I want you to get a sense of his love poetry, because the kind of spirituality at that time was very ascetic. Ascetic meaning giving up the appetites, giving up food, shelter, clothing, giving up the natural desires. It was a real letting go. And sometimes the monks would be so hard on themselves that they had to be cautioned by their superiors to not fast so much lest they die. So there was a natural sense that you're going to reach God through asceticism, that is giving up. And sometimes people overdid it, and they needed to have the virtue of obedience so that they wouldn't go too far in harming themselves. His seminary training, the end of 1564, John of Matthias, after his novitiate year, arrived in Salamanca for studies in philosophy and theology. This was one of the great universities of Bologna. One of the great universities of Bologna, Paris, and Oxford. Salamanca ranked among them, Salamanca. Friar John was remarkable for an outstanding talent and application, testimony bolstered by his appointment as the prefect of studies while he was still a student, which involved teaching classes every day, defending public theses, and resolving objections that were raised. But for some reason, this brilliant young Carmelite was dissatisfied. They wanted him to join the faculty and be one of the brilliant theologians. But he was dissatisfied by that. He found his attention turning frequently to the contemplative Carthusians. And the Carthusians were probably the most extreme. We would say the Trappists today became the most extreme of the asceticism. But in that day, the Carthusians went even farther than the Trappists. And he was drawn to that kind of extreme asceticism, which would be hours and hours of prayer every day, and living on bread and water, and working hard throughout the day, and turning your attention to God, as that would be your main focus in life, would be draw some connection to God.
So, Father, he's a young man, and he turned from his family's Methodist background to
You know,
Catholicism.
I should always be careful not to introduce too much information, because I began with Isaac Hecker, who was the founder of the Paulist Fathers in the 1800s. I said, why did Isaac Hecker choose John of the Cross as one of... So he was the founder of our community. He was the one that turned away from Methodism.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Very
so...
good. That's great.
Anyway, maybe I should have a slide that says Isaac Hecker and then John of the Cross. But Isaac Hecker is the one that chose John of the Cross as one of his patrons for the Paulist Fathers because of his mystical desires. And John of the Cross lived in the 1500s, in the 15th century. And in his life, he lived a life of extreme asceticism. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so then he met Teresa of Avila. Anybody heard of Teresa of Avila?
Yes.
Okay. What do you know about her?
Isn't she a doctor of the church?
Doctor of the church?
Doctor of the church.
Yeah.
Oh,
She launched a great reform of the Carmelites. She was a Carmelite, and she launched a great reform of the Carmelites. They met in Medina shortly after John's ordination to the priesthood in 1567, when Teresa was there to found her second community of the Carmelites, according to the Reformed discipline. And there was a ferment of reform in this time in Spain. There were lots of different reforms going on, but she had one of the more successful ones that really caught on. Her first foundation was in Avila. She was 52 and he was 25. He was considering transferring to the more stricter order, to the Carthusians. But she got a hold of him and she said, we need somebody just like you to help us do this reform of both of the men's communities and the women's communities. She wanted somebody like him that was intelligent, that knew the theology, that could hold his own in all the great debates, but also loved God and really wanted a deep experience of God's presence. So she pulled him back from the brink of going all the way over to the contemplative side, so that he would have a balance between the theology, the leadership, the active life, and the contemplative life. So he was a contemplative and an active
do you
person.
know how they met?
I want to recommend to you this wonderful book in which you can read all the details of how they met. But basically, they were in this area of central Spain. They were both Carmelites. She was looking for some good men. She found him.
And he came into her
And
path.
he came into her orbit.
Right.
She was older than him, and she's the one that wrote The Interior Castle,
Yes.
which was her spiritual autobiography. And she was looking for someone that could, because in those days, women's communities had to have a man as a spiritual director. They had to have a priest. Nobody else would do. That was the law of the church. So she was looking for some priests, and she found some priests that were rather stupid that she didn't like. And she didn't want the stupid priest to be guiding her sisters. She wanted some smart ones that also were well balanced. And that's how she found John. So her friendliness and enthusiasm, he agreed to work with her in the reformation of the Carmelite friars. So she wanted to reform the friars, the boys, the men, so that they could be good spiritual directors for the women. That was her goal. Shortly afterwards, he changed his name to St. John of the Cross. So the reformation of the religious orders in the 15th century in response to the upheavals in religious life caused by the Black Death plague. So people were really examining their lives. Why did God kill off 2/3 of the population of Europe? We don't know. Well, we better reform our lives. So the early attempts carried an anti-intellectual strain. So let's forget about the intellectual stuff. Let's get down to the business of doing our everyday, of doing our prayers and our work and our fasting. There was an emphasis on affectivity, the emotional side, the external ceremonies. This would be lots of liturgical ceremonies, devotions, community vocal prayer, so praying together out loud. All the things you expect of women's and men's communities. What they put all the emphasis there, not on study. And their desire arose for more time for interior prayer, seeking union with God through love as its most important concern, seeking nourishment in Scripture and classic spiritual works. That's what they were doing in their reforms. And her community, she began to start communities that were just 12 people. Jesus Christ at the center, obviously the number of the disciples. They were to be small communities, no class distinctions. This was a problem in those days because you had wealthy nobility that were sponsoring some communities and some didn't have wealthy nobility. So you had impoverished nuns and you had nuns with very high social status, and she wanted to sort of bring it all together in these groups of 12 where there'd be no class distinctions. Everybody was a disciple, a sister of God. And the Incarnation Monastery, where she came from, was one of these very wealthy monasteries that had wealthy nobility sponsoring them. And she wanted learned men so that they might be good guides, not only through experience of the same style of life, but through their learning. Having suffered much from the vincible ignorance. What does vincible mean? It's underlined as being a wrong spelling. You know what the word invincible means? Invincible ignorance? Invincible ignorance means you can't overcome it, it's there. It's unconquerable. But vincible means, well, they could overcome it, but they were just stubborn. So invincible ignorance of her confessors. She was keen to spare her daughters of anything similar. So she wanted somebody that was both intelligent and understood the lifestyle of her sisters. And he was at the time, he tended to stress the limitations of learning. So he was going towards the extremes of asceticism and prayer, long hours of prayer and not very much study. And she wanted to bring him back from that. He treated austerities. He began to treat austerities with a certain skepticism. So austerities were these long hours of fasting and prayer and hard work. And he began to see them with a little bit of skepticism, seeing that with so many other good things, they can end up wrecking the spiritual life. So that in the spiritual life, you have to have a balance. Too much of a good thing is the same as having a bad thing. You had to have a balanced life of community, of treating each other with respect, of hard work, of prayer, of enough sleep, of enough food. Spiritual life has to have a balance to it. And then in those days, maybe in our day too, people will go to extremes. Oh, we'll fast all the time. If we fast all the time, we'll be even more holy. But then they'd be skin and bones, and then you really can't, you can't do the spiritual life if you don't have physical health. So they began to see it's important to have a balance. So in her communities, there should be joy. The nuns would take time for recreation. They would sing and write poetry for one another. She wanted a happy life as well as a spiritual life. And so John would start to talk about spiritual gluttony. Spiritual gluttony is too much of a good thing. Fasting to the point of damaging their bodies. Besides the imperfection of seeking after these delights, the sweetness of the person's experience makes them go to extremes and pass beyond the mean in which virtue resides and is acquired. And these are some of his words. And these are words, coming from Middle Ages of Spain. So the words seem a little odd to us. But he would talk about the sweetness of over-fasting. And for some people, fasting, it brings on a high. Has anybody here ever done a hunger strike? I can't say that I have, but I've known people that have. And hunger strikes, people will go a day or two and they're really hungry. After 3 or 4 days, they begin to get high as a kite. And they can go on that way for a long time, just drinking water. And there's sweetness to fasting. It's kind of it brings on an excitement, but at the same time it's damaging your body. So he talks about the sweetness of fasting that makes you go to extremes and pass beyond the mean in which virtue resides and is acquired.
But excuse me, I don't know if this is going off on a tangent, but how long does a person experience that high when they're fasting? Are you able to answer that?
From
Probably would bring them after.
Eventually you go down.
Come down.
Yeah. You can go for a long time if you have just a little bit of fruit juice along with the water. You have to have some carbohydrates. Because otherwise what happens is the body begins to use up the muscle tissue. And if you have just a little bit of carbohydrate, it uses up the fat cells. So there's a healthy way to fast and an unhealthy way to fast.
So that's something new you're sharing, that they have that high. I have not
Yeah,
heard
yeah,
that
you
before.
get high as a kite.
Oh,
Yeah. And people experience that after just a couple of days. Now, there's some people that, when it comes to the Easter Vigil, the Holy Thursday and the Good Friday, will go with just water for 48 hours. And even then, they'll begin to experience that high. So that when they get to this Easter Vigil, it's just a spiritual high and a physical high all at once. Yeah. Okay, so here he comes in 1572. He arrives in Avila. He starts to make common cause with Teresa. He enters the feminine religious world, a world that was to become his special field of spiritual ministry. So he became a spiritual director to women's communities. November 18, 1572, while he was her director, Teresa unexpectedly received the grace of spiritual marriage, which was the 7th level in her interior castle. She was now in the 7th and final dwelling place of her spiritual journey, the center room of her interior castle, and she came to know the highest state of intimacy with God. And that was under his direction. So this is why she respected him so much as a spiritual director, because he was able to help her avoid the extremes and move just towards that place that leads you into intimacy with God.
What is spiritual marriage?
I knew you'd ask that. I don't know the term exactly, how it relates to Teresa. And so you'd have to read The Interior Castle by Teresa of Avila. But basically, it's that intense relationship between the soul and Jesus. And that spiritual marriage between the interior soul and Jesus. That's the highest level of commitment, a lifetime commitment. And there's specialized language here, and I can't tell you what it all means.
because isn't that, sorry, like, I'm thinking that the church is referred to as the bride of Christ, isn't it?
Yes.
Some things that they
Mhm.
use that term.
It's an image that comes from Paul.
Oh, okay.
St. Paul talks about the church as the bride of Christ. And the church as the bride of Christ represents us as a community. But the interior life of the individual can also be spiritual marriage with Christ. Now, here's some verses from his Living Flame of Love. And these are stanzas concerning an ecstasy experienced in high contemplation. So he wrote several sets of poems, and I'm going to read off those. Okay, sorry. So his books include The Ascent of Mount Carmel, which we'll get to, The Dark Night, The Spiritual Canticle, The Living Flame of Love. So he has several prose books that go along with his poetry. And here he's talking about a person that in the ecstasy experience, the higher he ascends, the less he understands, because the cloud is dark which lit up the night. Whoever knows this remains always in unknowing, transcending all knowledge. So the language again begins to appear contradictory when you get to these high levels of spirituality. The higher he ascends, he talks about the ascent of Mount Carmel, the less he understands. So even though they've studied theology their whole lives, they've learned about mystical theology, they've been praying constantly and living a balanced life of spirituality, their goal is to have less and less human understanding, so they take on the mind of Christ. So they talk about this less and less human knowledge, even though they're becoming more and more trained.
Didn't he write something that was The Cloud of the Unknowing?
That's a book that comes out of the Middle Ages. It's not by John of
Oh,
the
it's
Cross.
not by him, though.
No, but it gives you the idea.
Did he write The Dark Night of the Soul?
Dark Night of the Soul, which we're going to get to.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay, so the less he understands, the higher he gets in the spiritual life, the less he understands, because the cloud is dark, which lit up the night. See these opposites, clouds, dark, but they're leading to light. because it's God's light. It's human darkness, but it's God's light. And I hope to help you get to that point of understanding what that means. Whoever knows this remains always in unknowing, transcending all knowledge. Interesting. It's unknowing, but it's transcending the knowledge that we've gained as human beings. Does that make sense? According to Barb's face, no. I'm just- okay,
I'm
is this,
just digesting what you're saying.
you're adjusting. Okay, you getting anything out of this, Barb?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Does this make any sense, Tim?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you guys getting this?
Overall, my little mind.
Overall, okay,
Yeah.
overall, we'll proceed. We'll slog through this together. Okay. He was very short, by the way. So she said, well, so Teresa said, well, even though he was short, small in stature, I believe that he's great in the eyes of God. So he was not a physically powerful person. So he was a confessor for Teresa and her nuns in the monastery, the Incarnation, what was the big one that she came from, near Avila, between 1572 and 1577. This is 16th century, right?
Right.
I've been saying 15th century, I always get that mixed up, but it's in the 1500s in Spain, time of the Inquisition, but a time of great spiritual fervor also. Teresa and John received much from each other. It was said that during a conversation they had on the Trinity, they both went into ecstasy and they were seen elevated from the ground. This was another thing that people saw as a sign of holiness, was that you would be elevated from the ground. Okay, now whether that fits with Western scientific understanding, I don't know, but that was one of the characteristics of holiness. Fragrance was one of the characteristics, that there was a fragrance of holiness that people would have. So they were some of the signs that they looked for in those days. But anyway, they went into ecstasy together. They were so excited about what they were learning about the Trinity. Oh, and here I came again. Her nuns suffered from what she considered the vincible ignorance of her confessors. That's, they didn't have to be as ignorant as they were, but they were. And she wanted to spare her nuns from these kind of confessors. And she thought John was a great confessor because through his intelligence, through his study, through his moderation, he led people to the holy path. She got vexed with him at times. He tended to stress the limitations of learning. In other words, he would say, well, maybe we've done too much learning now. Let's get down to the real spiritual life. So she got a little vexed with that. She wanted a balanced spiritual life in which charity, detachment. Does anybody know what detachment means? This is one of the terms that's used a lot in the spiritual life.
Well, you remove yourself from worldly things.
Yeah. Remove yourself from worldly things.
Related to a disinterested love
Mm-hmm.
of loving but without emotion.
Okay. It's a love, but it's without an emotional connection. It's like if I were to say to my beloved cell phone, oh, I don't need you anymore. I don't need you anymore. Okay, that would be detachment. That would be very hard for me.
And how did you?
Or if I were to take my glasses and say, I don't need you anymore. So detachment from
But
physical
how did he
things.
say that again? I'm sorry. What did he just say?
Disinterested love, which is loving without the emotional aspect of it.
Oh, okay.
In fact,
That's profound.
John used to say, disinterested, he used to say, when you're in the monastery, live as if the other people weren't even there.
Oh.
Isn't that interesting? Because we're supposed to be a religious community, but ignore everybody around you. But you can only say that when you've come to this point of spiritual, that you're there together, you know that you respect each other, you know they're on the same spiritual path, but you're not paying attention to the other people because you're paying attention to God. So that kind of detachment even led to the level of saying, live like there's nobody around you at all. Detach from relationships, detach from things, detach from food, detach from all the human appetites, so that God will be the one that fills you.
Well, somebody has to peel the potatoes and wash the laundry.
That's good. Somebody does have to do that. And that's where a lot of this is, the balance still has to be there. You still have to have food, even though you're trying to fast. Because if you fast and you don't eat anything at all, you die. And they wanted to have happy monks and nuns that were close to God. So all that stuff had to be there.
But when you're like, now, maybe I'm saying this wrong, in religious communities, or even the diocesan priests, you're in a community together. I mean, you do acknowledge each other, you work together as a team.
Mm-hmm.
So detachment, I was thinking like you said, like your phone. But-
Yeah, detachment from things.
But that would, I guess I'm a little confused with like the people on around you.
Mm-hmm.
But that's more for your spiritual, but not for.
Yeah. No, I agree. It is confusing.
Okay.
But we're reading a different spiritual time.
Right.
4 centuries ago. It's a
Right.
time in which that's what they said. You
Right,
need to
okay.
detach even from the people around you.
Okay.
But it's all in balance
Right.
because it can be done badly,
Right.
you know? And there were a lot of people doing it badly. This is why John of the Cross was so respected, because he could do all these things and do them well. And they continuously sought out him to be spiritual directors, heads of monasteries. He led a number of monasteries over the years. They continued to seek him out because he had that, there was a healthy way that he approached it.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Marge, does this make any sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay. It's like, okay, we'll just keep going then. So later on, he became a bit skeptical of the value of too much austerity, pointing out that they could end up wrecking the whole spiritual life. So, and again, he did have a balance. So then there's conflicts, and there's politics in every life, and there were a number of Carmelites that didn't like John at all, and they didn't like this renewal that Teresa and John were doing. They felt it was going to screw up the Carmelites, that it was going to destroy them, and there were also politics of, who is the wealthy person sponsoring this monastery versus the wealthy person sponsoring this monastery. The king got involved, and nobody knew what he was talking about. So there was politics. Well, we got that today, politics in the church.
Didn't they break off too?
There was one major
trying
break
to
in the
address
Carmelites
that?
was between the Carmelites, the Calced, and the Discalced. And the Discalced, which he was, which means they wore sandals.
Yeah.
Who knows? But it was different branches that had different approaches.
They still exist today.
The
don't they?
Discalced and the Calced,
Because
yeah.
I never quite understood that. That's
Yeah.
what you said, some wear sandals and some don't.
Yeah. Well, it's like the Franciscans. You have the OFMs, the OFM Capuchins, and
Different.
the conventual. So they have 3 major branches. And then they've got hundreds of sisters communities. So every time you have a group of people that gets together in a religious life, they tend to develop their own ideas, and sometimes they split from others.
But there's only one Paulist.
So far.
Sorry.
Yeah, don't say anything. We do pretty well. Well, we're small for one thing.
How
There's
many?
only about 100 now.
Oh, there's 100?
There's only about 100. And 9 of them are over the age of 90.
Oh
So
my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
we're long lived. We're long lived.
Just 100 Paulist priests
Just 100,
in
yeah.
the U.S.?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was just about, in the 70s, we had 270. That was our highest number. And from the 70s to the 2017s, how long is that? 40 years? We've gone down less than half of what we were. But then again, you look at it this way. We started with 4 people at the very beginning, and that was a strong community that attracted people. So we could go down quite a bit more as long as we have a good mission, we're focused,
And you
and
have
we attract people.
several, I don't know if they're all seminarians, like that picture on the wall there.
Yeah, we have a number, and they're really good people. They're really good guys.
So you are,
Yeah. We're not building yet, because we don't have enough coming in to equal off us old farts that are dying.
And you may be the youngest one here.
Maybe. I don't know about that. We'll have to pull out our driver's licenses
not
and
to
see.
go off on a tangent, but I think other religious communities too, the Redemptorists, I know they're getting, like the pastor, I mean, I don't think that's old anymore, he's like 71, 72, and they're.
But religious communities come and go. Lots of them die off over the years, and it's okay, because there's a certain charism that meets a certain need. And if the need isn't there anymore,
Oh,
or if the charism doesn't attract new young people, it's okay to die off. It's okay if the Paulists die off, because something else will come along that meets the needs of the time. So this is a spirituality that met the needs of the 1500s. Okay, politics exist everywhere, even in communities, dioceses, etc. Many controversies, particularly between the Carmelites who wanted reform and those who didn't want reform. They said, we're fine where we are, don't reform us. Each side sought the patronage of higher-ups, popes, kings, superior generals, bishops, etc. They all had to have their protector. Those who had the lesser patrons tended to be punished severely. They could punish you if you didn't have a powerful patron. And in 1577, John's patron, the papal nuncio of Spain, died and left him defenseless.
Oh my.
So here he was at the age of 34, 35. His patron died, he was left defenseless. And he had enemies. He was imprisoned twice by Carmelite friars who didn't want John's reformation. The first time, in 1576, the nuncio was still alive and he freed John. The second time, after the nuncio's death, John was captured at night in his home. He was put in a monastery prison in Toledo for 9 months before he escaped. He was treated very severely, thrown into a 6 by 10 foot cell with only a small opening, no change of clothes, no baths, severe cold and heat, and beatings weekly. Can you believe that? They dragged him out once a week and his fellow monks beat him and then threw him back in the cell until once I think it was once a week they brought him out for a beating and then they threw him back in the cell.
That's just, I can't even fathom that. A monastery
But see, that's,
prison?
I know, this is what I'm saying about extremes. So people would see that in their life and they say, well, this is a good thing because we're the good guys and we have to punish the evil. And you could veer off so easily into an extreme, into the bad extremes. And that's one of the dangers of the spiritual life. It has to be carefully guided by wise spiritual directors or you come to this kind of thing.
I think of Joan of Arc, that pops in my mind.
Yeah, but in this case, you had his fellow monks were beating him once a week. Because in their minds, they were doing the will of God. So every time he got out, he looked around and he could sort of piece out together where the stairways were and where the doorways were and whatever. And eventually he was able to escape.
Oh my.
He was taken in by Teresa's nuns in Toledo, Spain, later in a hospital in Santa Cruz. So, what can I say? That was one of the extremes that's the danger of falling into in the spiritual life. Okay, now back to one of his poems.
Excuse me, what is a nuncio?
Nuncio is a representative of the Pope,
Okay.
papal nuncio. Each country has one. The living flame of love. And these are stanzas of the soul that suffers with longing to see God. Now he wrote a number of these stanzas in his head in prison because he didn't have any paper. He wrote about 2/3 of this living flame poem, which is quite long, in his head and was later able to write it down. I no longer live within myself, and I cannot live without God. For having neither him nor myself, what will life be? It will be 1,000 deaths, longing for my true life, and dying because I do not die. Barb, would you read that one for us?
The whole thing?
Yeah, the poem, starting here.
Okay. I no longer live within myself, and I cannot live without God. For having neither him nor myself, what will life be? It will be 1,000 deaths, longing for true life, and dying because I do not die.
I love the playfulness there, between life and death, and what is true life and what's dying. And physically still being alive is not the same as really living. So he's saying, I'm dying because my body hasn't died, but my spirit is not living yet. This life that I live is no life at all. And so I die continually until I live with you. Hear me, my God. I do not desire this life. I'm dying because I do not die. Tim, would you read that one?
This life that I live is no life at all, and so I die continually until I live with you. Hear me, my God. I do not desire this life. I am dying because I do not die.
This reminds me very much of the emotional trauma a person can go through in losing a loved one and not knowing how to cope with that grief. This is just jumping out at me as that type of dying on the inside, because I do not die physically, so I can be with the other person.
Yeah.
This reminds me of one of the letters of St. Paul, where he's, you know, I can't remember it exactly how it goes, but it's better to die, and I can't, do you know what I'm talking about? It's
I think
one
I
of
know the
his,
passage,
it's
yeah.
kind of similar, I mean, it's not, but and I'm not good at quoting scripture, but it's better, I can't remember how it
But
goes.
didn't he say something about,
Help me.
I no longer live, but it's Christ lives within me?
Yes, I think it's in that same
Mhm.
part. And he chooses the better half, and it just it kind of reminds me of that.
But see, these verses speak to us after 4 centuries,
Yeah.
which says something about the quality of the poetry that he was writing, that it is able to speak to our experience of losing a loved one
Oh.
and not dying physically, but dying on the inside. And these poems are deceptively simple, but the thinking behind them is so deep and so spiritual. And there's a lot that you can read about it, and it's all very well thought out as to what it means through the spiritual path.
Well,
But then what I love about it is it's so beautiful and deceptively simple, but also it's a whole spiritual body of thought that goes with it.
I used to say when my special person in my life died a number of years ago, I didn't want to die, but I didn't want to be here. So I don't know if that's kind of a similar
Exactly.
to,
Yeah.
since you that brought that back.
You didn't want to die, but you didn't want to live.
Yes,
Yeah.
but I would never do anything to harm myself, but I thought, you know, and that's.
But it's just
the
like St.
grief.
Paul, who said, I don't know if I want to be with Jesus
That's
out
right.
of the body
Right.
or in the body because I can be more help to you
To
if
help.
I'm in the body.
Yeah, you know what
Yeah, that's the
passage I'm
passage.
referring to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. When I am away from you, what life can I have except to endure the bitterest death known? Spiritual death. I pity myself, for I go on and on living, dying because I do not die. This is really beautiful in the Spanish. This is free verse translation, but the Spanish is rhyming and it's according to meter and so forth. It's beautiful poetry. And I've seen it rendered in English with rhyme and meter and so forth. It just does not work. No, but these translations are really powerful. Now, he wrote these, and he wrote the description for this towards the end of his life, for this devout lady, Doña Ana de Peñalosa, one of his spiritual directees who was also a supporter of the ministry. And he says, I felt somewhat reluctant to explain these 4 stanzas as you asked, since they deal with matters so interior and spiritual for which words are usually lacking. Which I think is why he wrote in poetry, because explaining things kind of takes the air out of it. But you write in poetry, it builds the energy. Anyway, he said, I find it difficult to say something of their content, and also one speaks badly of the intimate depths of the spirit if one does not do so with a deeply recollected soul. And I think that's a warning for us in our day. We're rushing around so much and we're talking and watching and the screen is always in front of us. But to have a deeply recollected soul that gives us the time to be able to speak truly and from the heart. And so he was reluctant to write this until he was ready to write for her the commentary. He said, I deferred this commentary until now, which the Lord seems to have uncovered some knowledge for me and bestowed some fervor. I love his faith here. He says, this is because of your holy desire, perhaps, since I have composed the stanzas for you, His Majesty, the Lord, wants me to explain them for you. I've been encouraged in knowing certainly that through my own ability I shall say nothing worthwhile, and thus only the faults and mistakes of this commentary will be mine. Now I'm going to give you a chance to work with some of these stanzas, but I want to get through the rest of this first. Okay, so he's talking about the fire. The soul now speaking has reached an enkindled degree and is so inwardly transformed in the fire of love and elevated by it that it is not merely united to the fire, but produces within it a living flame. So he's beginning to explain now what he means in the verses. The soul feels this and speaks of it thus in these stanzas with intimate and delicate sweetness of love, burning in love's flame and stressing in these stanzas some of the effects of this love. So he begins to explain to her what he meant by the verses. So overall, the writings of John of the Cross. He's a doctor of the church, proclaimed in 1926. He's not as prolific as some of the other writers of those days, but his main contribution is as one of the most renowned poets of Spain. Major works, the Spiritual Canticle, and the first 17 of these 39 verses, so over half, were written during his imprisonment in 1577. The Dark Night, written between 1577 and 1579, it's only 8 verses. We're going to get to it. It's awesome. The Living Flame of Love, which we did some of that, the last of his great poems, was written in 15 days at the request of his patron, Doña Ana de Peñalosa. And then he has the prose works in which he describes all of this. The Ascent of Mount Carmel, The Dark Night, Spiritual Canticle, and The Living Flame of Love. And now, just a couple of things about John. It's almost 8, so we're going to take a break. He discovered a close alliance between biblical history and his own personal history. So I mentioned the history about being imprisoned and beaten and so forth. So he found something in the Bible that related to his life. He was a mystic, but this didn't prejudice the teaching and the spiritual directing and the theologian work that he did. And a central purpose of his was to transmit his mystical experience to other people. He died, and when he was dying, he asked that the Song of Songs be read, while he was then repeating the words, "Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." Very much focused on spiritual marriage as his spirituality. He did receive the favors he sought, not to die as a superior. He wanted to die in a place where he was unknown and to die after having suffered much. And he was able to do all that. Okay, so before we go to the next part, I want to take a little break. Any other comments before we take a break?
Again, that definition of a mystic as being close to God or something,
Mhm.
what did you say?
Well, it has various definitions. It's not one of those you can really pin down, but basically it's having experiences that go beyond our ability to explain. You know, through rational thought, you can explain things, but you can't really explain the mystical experiences because they touch the heart and the soul. But it's basically about being so close to God that it's an unknowing. It's beyond our human ways of knowing.
I have, you said that song of, oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry, was that the one he wrote at the, which one? Oh, the living.
Living
Yeah,
Flame?
he wrote that
Yeah.
at the request of his patron.
Yeah.
So I mean, or is that read the book? How did she ask him to write that, or don't?
Read the book.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a little break. 5 minutes.
Okay.
So it's about self-denial. And we've just been reading down through here, so you can read that to yourself. But would you read out loud these last ones here?
Sure. The way of the imperfect spirit. In this nakedness, the spirit finds its quietude and rest. For in coveting nothing, nothing tries or tires, no,
Tires it.
yeah, tires it by pulling it up, and nothing oppresses it by pushing it down, because it is in the center of its humility.
Okay, remember this took him many years to work this out, but this is called the ascent of Mount Carmel. Carmel is that place where Our Lady appeared. It's considered the mountain of Our Lady in the Middle East. And he wanted to, the middle path, it says here, the path of Mount Carmel, the perfect spirit, and then it says nothing, 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 nothing. And even on the mount, nothing. So it's the kind of spirituality that's being described here. And there's different kinds of spirituality, but this kind of spirituality is when you deny yourself, when you think nothing, and eventually you have everything. It says, now that I no longer desire all these things, I have them all, but without desire. Remember, like Jesus said, when you do not wish to have all these things, when you lose mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters in my name, you will have all the mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters that you ever had, but in a different way. Now it's not because you desire them, just because they are given. And it says down below, now that I least desire them, I have all of them, but without desire. So what I'm going to invite you to do is to draw your own drawing of Mount Carmel. I'm going to give you a paper, and I've given you colored pencils. And so you can read a little bit more about his description of Mount Carmel. But on this one, I'm going to invite you to say, what goods of heaven do you already have, but you don't desire them? Does that make any sense?
Something you
As
don't.
much as John at the Cross does.
A good of heaven that you already have, but you don't even desire it. Think about that. It could be a detachment. It could be a sense of peace. It could be a love in your family, a joy. But you're not attached to it. It takes a little while to think about that. And what goods of the earth do you already have without desiring them? What could that be? I'm going to hand these out so we can think about that. So the things you have, but you don't even desire them. They're just already given.
We have 15 minutes to do this.
Yes, because you're speed learners. So I'm going to ask you to draw a picture of Mount Carmel and the path that God is calling you to walk and what you need to sacrifice to ascend. And for extra credit, you can write a poem about your spiritual path.
No peeking at your neighbor's paper.
And no peeking.
This is very good, but I think this is something.
Darlene, you're going to do great, but you have to be quiet to do it.
Okay.
What goods of heaven do you already have without desiring them? So think about that. And if you want to know what the goods of heaven are, here you look on John of the Cross. The goods of heaven are down below. Love, joy, knowledge, consolation, rest. No, I got that wrong. The goods of heaven. Glory, joy, knowledge, consolation, rest. You see that?
No, I do.
Okay. So those are the goods of heaven. And maybe you already have those. Maybe you already have some of those. Those are along here. Goods of heaven that you may already have. The goods of heaven. Yeah. And the goods of earth are very similar. Yeah. Possessions, joy, knowledge, consolation, rest. So possessions. Maybe God gave you great possessions that allow you to help the poor. Maybe God gives you joy that allows you to help other people. So think about. So I'm going to give you some time to just work on that. Let me know if you'd like another piece of paper, I can give it to you. Okay, I'm going to show you mine, which may be helpful. You don't have to do it the way I'm doing it, but just to give you an idea. Sacrifice. What sacrifice do you make? So I wrote down here, a big sacrifice was moving away from home to go to college so I could be educated. Went a long ways away, and the sacrifice was being away from my family. Later on, I decided to enter the seminary, made the sacrifice of celibacy, of not having a wife, but allowed me to become a priest. One of the big sacrifices of priesthood is having to move every several years and letting go and forming new friendships and so forth. But it allowed me to be here. So that's my path up Mount Carmel, is those sacrifices that lead to those good things. So what I'm encouraging you to do is think about the sacrifice you made along the way, what you're letting go of, and what God is giving you in return. Is that helpful? And you can write on the back of these to draw your mountain. You have one? Uh-huh. Yeah. Peace, joy, happiness. These are the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Yeah. The wire is cut. Here's a piece of paper. So draw your mountain and draw the sacrifices that you made to go up the mountain and what the blessings are that you received in return for the sacrifice. Kind of like a lifeline. Have you ever done a lifeline?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I'm not good at doing this sort of thing. So it's like,
I changed my schedule.
I can, like, it's like, it's not like I have to ask permission, but I like to.
You do it because you love it, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you change your schedule. You let go of things that you want to do.
Yeah.
So you don't want that down.
It's gonna make it sound like he's off. No, it's,
Because you love it.
yes, and it's like, it's probably kind of the same thing, where, like, some church events, I'll ask him, it's the same thing. I mean, I'll just go myself.
This is a sacrifice.
Yeah, I have
We can
gone.
do it for a reason, right?
Yes.
And what do you get from it?
Well, nothing.
No, you get more than
No, 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 I'm happy to do it. I mean, I may be a little disappointed, but,
But the fact that you're living with someone that you love, right?
yes.
So that's the benefit to the sacrifice.
Oh,
So what's the benefit to these?
that I have him in my life.
Yeah. So let that down. See, that's your ascent. You're going up.
And he can be supportive, and I can share with him sometimes. It's like you said that before. He's more, I think he's more appreciative. This is a crooked mountain here.
That's good. This makes sense to me.
Yeah, but I don't know how far to do. Like, what is- A lot of times I don't rest. Do something.
Tonight.
Yeah.
So you came here tonight.
Hmm.
You sacrificed your time and energy to come here tonight. And is there benefit?
Because I should be taking somebody to the grocery store. Oh, it's, and that's why I say, I'm ready to help sometimes. I should not get the parts that say, oh, no, I should do it.
Oh, I see.
That type of thing. And I have.
Oh, very good already. But that's the benefit, the sacrifice is the community. Well, that's the hard part. That's the hard part. This isn't making any sense, Marge.
Oh, it makes sense, I just don't have the answers.
No.
That's okay, it's good, good to look at.
Okay. Is this making any sense, Tim?
Yeah. I got a lot going here.
Great, great, okay. Well, I'm going to give you guys some chance to talk about this. Would you rather talk to one person, or do you want to talk about it as a group?
Yes,
As a group? All right.
we're
All right.
small enough.
We're small enough. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to let you start. You like to talk, right?
Oh, yes, I do, but, yeah.
Okay, darling. Just
Yeah.
tell us what you did.
Well, Father helped me. I was kind of at a loss what to do, but he inspired me. I have a special person in my life, and his name is Terry. And he was, I didn't think of it as a sacrifice, but there's times when I may want to do something, and not that we have to do everything together, but I will change my, I guess if it's a schedule that well, that's okay, we don't have to do that. And so then I guess along with that, I let go of things that I would want to do, which I didn't think of as a sacrifice, but, and so as the benefit is I have Terry in my life, and I'm able to share things with him, talk with him, hugs is the benefit, companionship, and then I have Terry's love.
Great, thanks.
And this mountain is, I'm not good at it. It just kind of, but that's the peak. And I'm happy to do what we do. I think overall we have. I thought when I was putting this down, I said, it doesn't sound like he's awful, but I mean, but it's give and take.
No, and I know you enough to know that there is sacrifice, but there's also, because of love is why you do it.
Yes, thank you. I hope that made sense, what I just said.
Okay, we're getting towards ending time, so if you'd like to talk, now's the time.
Okay. Well, I was married when I was 17, and it'll be 49 years in December. And so getting married so early and having children as young as I did, I in a great sense, sacrificed living the single life, never been single, and went through college with my wife and didn't really experience the traditional college way of living, and just focused on, nose to the grindstone, getting through best grades I could and get a job as quick as I could to start providing for the family. And my wife and I have gone different paths despite being together all this time. And particularly with respect to my religious practice of faith, which she does not have. And so I've been ridiculed by my wife for pursuing what I'm doing. And most of the friends we have and have developed prior to me reverting 20 years ago to my Catholic faith have values similar to my wife. So I've sacrificed a community of Catholic friendship, except what I've been able to pick up through my parish, which has become very meaningful to me. Now, the benefits, my wife offers me many gifts, wonderful cook and plans great trips, and very intelligent, and she's contributed in the community, and it's been gratifying to see what she's done in her own right. And of course, we have some beautiful children and 7 great grandchildren. I mean, 7 grandchildren who are great. I'm not in the great grandchildren yet. But what this has done, benefits, is that because of the conflict that I have in my life, I so much more highly value my religious faith and practice than I could ever imagine otherwise. I mean, it's whenever I go to Mass, I feel grateful that I'm able to be there because of the conflict that it sometimes creates. And I have gained a respect by those persons whom I respect myself. There's a lot of others that don't respect me, and that's okay. And I've enjoyed wonderfully meaningful volunteer work, and I'm feeling closer to God and stronger in my faith than ever before, and it's just been a very steady progression over 20 years, or probably longer, but that since I made the commitment to seek a meaningful faith in God.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's led to a centering prayer practice, which I've been doing for a year and a half, and I'm really, I feel that's just another step to getting closer to God. So these have all been beneficial to me.
Great, thanks, Tim.
Congratulations. Upcoming anniversary.
Mixed blessing.
Yes.
Actually.
Yes.
But so often living in conflict does lead to spiritual graces.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I feel those wonderfully. I mean, there's some, ecstatic moments of joy in my life. And they're very precious to me.
Great. Thanks. Would you like to give yours?
Should I give you just my poem?
Oh, you wrote a poem?
Uh-oh.
Oh.
Yes.
Jumping right to the extra.
Rather than my life story.
Okay, if you were going for the extra credit, yes.
In seeking, there are failures, many frustrations, but great joy. Because finding is never elsewhere, it is within. To be whole, I find I need to be intentional. Nothing happens without trying. Relationships are everything, all else is nothing.
Very good.
That's
Very
great.
good.
I noticed he made note that you get the extra credit.
I
Yes,
saw that
definitely.
too. Do you have anything to share, ladies?
Oh, I find that my greatest sacrifices are in time, in giving of myself, and in physical relocation. You're moving from location to location. Because of those sacrifices, I have gained a college education, a family, many new friends, perspectives, knowledge, travel, and skills.
Mhm.
A couple of the greatest are the Whitecaps and classes like this. And I am a great Whitecaps fan, and we have had the privilege of hosting several young men in our home and walking with them on their journeys. And, being away from home, some of them have had things happen within the family that are several hundred miles away and not able to be with them, that we've been able to walk with them and help them through some of those difficult times, so that they can keep their heads screwed on right and do the job that they've been hired to, without losing their focus. So that's, even though it's been a great deal of fun, there have been blessings in having these young guys in our home. So.
And a great deal of sacrifice was required to do all that.
Yeah. We had, we let them use one of our cars to travel to and from the ballpark because we live 20 miles from the ballpark, and usually the guys will come and they don't have transportation.
Do you have more than one at a time?
Yes, we'd usually have two.
Oh.
They do prefer
They
to.
have their own bedroom,
Yeah.
finished bath,
Yeah,
basement.
yeah. So there are two
Private
bedrooms and a
baths.
private bathroom for them. Include them in family activities if they want to join us. If they don't, they go hungry.
They know where the refrigerator is.
Yeah, they know where the refrigerator and how to operate the pantry and the microwave.
So you have them through the season,
Through the, yes.
the baseball
Yeah,
season?
they would come in early April and leave then in early September.
Great.
So, fun time, but there are some sacrifices that need to be made on our part, and they come in very tentative, of course not knowing us from anybody, and we're not members of the family, but
Sure.
we become family to them.
Wow.
It's ironic that she grew up listening to the Cubs and the Tigers. But it was me that introduced her to the Whitecaps when I was looking for some Christmas gift for her stocking.
Oh.
I stumbled across a 10-ticket pass to the Whitecaps. Well, foolish me, I didn't get those by Christmas time. They don't produce those till February or March or whatever. So I still didn't have anything. But that brought her into the ballpark, and we're sitting there, we're talking to an executive, and long story short, we ended up with sponsoring
So how many years?
Okay, so there's a lot of grace. We're looking at the time right now.
I'm
And I just
sorry.
want to see if there's any, if you two would like to say
Marge,
anything.
Barb?
Well, I do a lot of things for a lot of people, and a lot of times I should be doing some things for myself.
Oh, okay.
I'd rather be doing that. That's the way I've always been. Like, sounds for somebody needs a place to stay, okay. Come back again sometime. But a lot of times I think that I do too much for others.
Okay.
And maybe they should be doing some of this for themselves. But,
Okay.
good example today, took a gentleman to the doctor. He could find a way to get there. That's not the idea. But since I take him to the grocery store every week, he just figured that I would do that. So he called and set everything up. And then a week before I'm supposed to do it, I have to change my schedule and that kind of thing. So, but that makes me a little angry. But I've learned to live with it. A lot of people that I see, I have very little family left. But that's okay. I can find things to do, help somebody out.
Okay, thanks, Barb. Did you want to say something?
I have a lot of uncertainty where I'm at today. I was committed to seeing my stepmom for 6 years, and she died, so I'm looking for other opportunities of kind of where God calls me next, or what to give more of my time, what kind of involvement I want to give, and what He calls me to give, or what that next kind of trying to figure out those next sacrifices or steps.
Did she die recently?
Right. Okay, well, oops, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just because of what time it is and we have to wrap up, I just want to point out that there's a lot of grace is coming through all this. Things that we're not choosing, but that are benefits. Sacrifices that we're making that allow us to have community or more direction in our life or more quiet time. And as usual, I didn't get the timing worked out just right. But I do want to kind of finish up with one of the poems from John of the Cross. And thank you so much for what you said, because it does show that the spirituality comes from sacrifice, from giving, from community, and that leads us into a higher spiritual life. Okay, so we'll have time to chat among ourselves when it's finished, but I just want to give the final poem, The Dark Night. One dark night, fired with love's urgent longings, ah, the sheer grace, I went out unseen, my house being now all stilled. Darkness insecure by the secret ladder, disguised, ah, the sheer grace, in darkness and concealment, my house being now all stilled. On that glad night in secret, for no one saw me, nor did I look at anything with no other light or guide than the one that burned in my heart. This guided me more surely than the light of noon, to where he was awaiting me, him who I knew so well, there in a place where no one appeared. O guiding night, O night more lovely than the dawn, O night that has united the lover with his beloved, transforming the beloved in her lover. Upon my flowering breast, which I kept wholly for him alone, there he lay sleeping, and I caressing him, there in a breeze from the fanning cedars. When the breeze blew from the turret as I parted his hair, it wounded my neck with its gentle hand, suspending all my senses. I abandoned and forgot myself, laying my face on my beloved. All things ceased. I went out from myself, leaving my cares forgotten among the lilies. And with that, I just want to end hoping that you'll have another chance to read some of John of the Cross's poetries. Amen. Yeah.
Amen.
Thank you, Tom.